Welcome to Resting Places, Learning Spaces, the podcast where we explore cemeteries, memorial spaces, and more, and the lessons they hold for history, memory, and education. I'm Dr. Hilary Van Dyke, and today we are taking a journey to the mystical Stone Henge. While not a cemetery in the traditional sense, Stonehenge is tied deeply to death, ritual, and remembrance. It's a space where the past presses up against the present in stone. I was there in July, and I'll have some audio from my tour guide mixed in here as I talk through the history. But I think in this episode, we'll uncover how this iconic site really has just been a facet of human curiosity since it's come to exist, and then explore how teachers can bring these ancient mysteries into today's classrooms. So we're going to get into the history of Stonehenge, but I feel like I just want to put a disclaimer that just says everything that I found contradicts everything else that I found. So take whatever you want and maybe do your own research around Stonehenge. But first, I'm going to actually play the audio I captured from the guide that was leading the tour. And there's a bit of background noise from the bus, so just be aware of that. If you want to, you can actually just skip ahead 12 minutes and then hear me talk a little bit about the history that I was able to find. And there's plenty of history out there. I'm not saying that there's not history available. It just feels a lot like a lot of it contradicts the rest of it. All right, so first let's start with the guide. Again, you can fast forward about 12 minutes if you want to skip through this.
Part of the 17th century. And back then, among the upper classes of Britain, there was a huge fascination with all of the ancient civilizations, and that was why John Aubrey, he wrote the very first catalogue outlining every single historical monument in Britain. There are thousands of them, and Stonehenge, understandably, took the focal point in this rather hefty tome. It was John Aubrey who coined the very name Stonehenge, which does have a meaning. It's a word of two halves, and I will say the first half, stone, is perhaps a bit self-explanatory, because we're dealing with these monoliths weighing up to 30 metric tons each, carved from sandstone, which has been brought to the site from quarries very far away. And the second half of the Stonehenge name, a henge, is a technical term which archaeologists they use to describe a man-made earthwork in the shape of a circular ditch dug into the ground. And it was very much what John Aubrey realized was surrounding the stone circle when he started his work, that there was a henge, a circular ditch with a diameter of 350 feet surrounding the site. But to envision how the place must have been looking when he arrived first time ever, we do need to apply a little bit of imagination, because the often strong wind would have been bringing dust, dirt, sand, debris, which had accumulated everywhere, covering the site in a thick layer of sand. And it was when he removed all this debris that he saw this very large ditch, the henge itself. And not only that, but the majority of the upright standing stones over time, they would have been toppling, now lying flat on the grounds on their sides. And John Aubrey, when he saw the henge, he realized that on opposite sides of it was seemingly an accessway. And he deducted, well, it must have been enclosing a site used for pagan worshipping. Nobody knows which rituals were staged within the confines of the henge. They might even have erected wooden structures, perhaps even temples. But then over time, the wood, it has just eroded away. There are no traces left of it. The most important find made by John Aubrey was in the bottom of the henge when he cleaned it all out. He found a number of antlers. These antlers, dropped by deer, upon examination, they bore evidence of having been used as improvised tools, shovels, pickaxes, to dig in the ground with. And of course he soon realized that the very henge had been dug by using the antlers to dig with. And he could not date anything he'd found, but luckily he had those antlers stored safely at a museum, and it's come up to be about 25 years ago. Finally, modern scientists, they were examining the antlers. They were using the latest available carbon dating technologies, and of course one cannot carbon date stones, but organic materials as the antlers. That's what we can use it for. And it gave us very precisely 3,100 years before Christ as the point in time where the antlers were from and where the entire Stone Henge story, it took its beginning. And among historians, there's a consensus that the stones would not have been there yet. They arrived a few centuries later, and when looking at the mineral composition within these huge monoliths, it's very clear they're not made from any kind of locally available materials. The larger of the stones, the big upright standing ones, experts, they will call them sarsen. They're from a quarry near to Oxford, the Marlborough Hills. It's about 25 miles from here in a straight line. While some of the smaller stones you'll see, they are from another country. They're from across the borders in Wales, the Presnes Hills, and that's a whopping 200 miles away. And that led to historians for many, many years arguing over how could these raw unworked slabs of sandstone, how could they have been brought so far across a landscape which is not flat at all and not having any kind of machinery to help out. And some were suggesting that perhaps the answer is men were dragging the slabs of stone on sleds. And lots of skepticism. Many said that's not even possible to do. And about 20 years ago, practical experiments, they were now carried out, proving that one can actually transport 30 tons plus of cargo on a sled, only using manpower. But it would have taken over 100 strong men working in unison to do so. And I find that's a very good illustration of how much determination, how much coordination which went into this logistical phase of the project. And it is assumed this was done about 2,500 years before Christ, and it was the Stone Age. They did not have any kind of metals. So the only tools they could be using to shape these slabs into perfectly rectangular monoliths, polishing the surfaces to a smooth finish, it would have been flint chisels and mallets. Flint is on one hand a very hard material, but it's brittle, which meant the chisels, they were not very good. They would have been shattering more or less immediately as the work started. And that's why some theories, they've been suggesting that perhaps some workers, they could have been toiling a full lifetime, only working on one stone, but never ever seeing that stone being completed. And that is really, as far as even the most recent research has been able to deduct, the way up to telling us this is how it must have been done. Nobody has been able to come up with answers to the big questions, and there are many of them. For instance, if we assume they did not have any cranes, how could they have gotten the stones to stand balancing in the upright positions? And even more, others of these heavy blocks, they will have been lifted very high up in the air to then carefully be laid down flat, forming horizontal lintels connecting the tops of the upright standing stones. There are many more questions than answers, and most people tell us after they've been to Stonehenge that the less information we have, the less facts we know, the better experience we'll get. Because this absence of facts, it will force us to use our own imagination to try and see if we can come up with the missing answers. And that's why in some ways I like to think of Stonehenge as a kind of an art installation. And this is to be understood in a way that it is really open to our own interpretations. We don't know why they built Stonehenge, at least one of the theories. And the big upright standing sarsen, the big monoliths, they're forming a primitive but rather useful astronomical observatory, or perhaps rather a calendar, which can be used to pinpoint one important event, one important day every single year. The shortest day, the winter solstice, which then falls just before Christmas. And the reason why it would have been crucial for Stonehenge builders to know when is the shortest day, this time it was when the people habitating Britain, they were starting to change from mainly being hunter-gatherers to grow crops on fields. Agriculture became a thing, so the shortest day would have been a very good sign for them. It's almost time to sow the seeds out on the fields. Getting that right within next year, fall harvest time, have been helping them maximize the yields of their crops, and hopefully by having sufficient supplies of food, they could allow their tribe to survive through the next cold winter. sorry, the calendar. It does still work, but we are quite a bit out of sync, out of phase with the seasons to experience it, because the functionality is only there on the correct day, 2 days before Christmas, and then one must be present at the Stone Henge site. So early in the morning it's still pitch black and dark everywhere. To stand at a certain point, which is clearly signposted on the footpath you'll be walking on, enabling you to find that sacred location. From where one in the early morning darkness look through the center stone circle, through a portal formed of stone, and then in the distance, in the horizon, can enjoy the sight of the sun being born out of the ground, the solar disk slowly ascending up on the sky to reach its apex. And this is a very inspirational sight. Among the people it has been giving inspiration to, we normally mention the Druids. A Druid, it was a title for a priest officiating for the Celtic people. The Celts, they arrived in Britain during the Bronze Age, about 1500 BC. And when they settled, they brought with them a tradition containing elements of human sacrifice. We do know that Druids, they were frequent users of Stonehenge for their ceremonies, so it's more than likely men and women, they will have been sacrificed to ancient gods in between the stones, and this is really adding to the dramatic atmosphere. And a lot of scientists, a lot of historians, John Aubrey, first man to research Stonehenge, they've been pointing fingers in the direction of the Druids, naming them as the most likely Stonehenge builders. But I can see a discrepancy here, because remember, when the Druids arrived in the Bronze Age, they would have found Stonehenge already in existence, Stonehenge being ancient by then, 1,000 years old. So yes, the Druids did use Stonehenge frequently, but they could not in any way have created it. One might well ask then, if the Druids didn't build Stonehenge, who did then? And then we're stepping into the most frequently asked question when going to the stones, the one along the lines of, is it really true Stonehenge was built by aliens, visitors from other planets? And the only answer I've been able to come up with so far is that I've been watching some of those movies giving us alien intervention as explanation for everything, and I have been enjoying a few of them, to be honest. But whether it really is the case, I feel it's best leaving that one open, leaving it up to everyone individually to decide upon. But in reality, as the swords proclaim, the whole of Stonehenge is ahead of us. In reality, in real life, there is a potential connection between Stonehenge and visitors from other worlds. And that connection, it is crop circles. The source we're playing here, very often called crop circle country, because every single year, just before harvest time, the farmers growing their crops and fields near to the stones, they usually find a large number of crop circles embedded into the fields, causing damage and reducing the yield, costing money. And last year, noticed that 32 big crop circles, they were found by Stonehenge. But whether these circles really are manifestations of spaceships having touched down, or whether one can perhaps envision pranksters sneaking out at night to form them, it is a good example of how big the fascination with the interest in everything Stonehenge still is.
So, with the background from the guide, I'm going to repeat some of what he said and add just a little bit more. But according to Britannica, Stonehenge is a prehistoric stone circle monument, cemetery, and archaeological site. It's in Salisbury, Wiltshire, England. It was built between 3000 and 1520 BCE in 6 stages. It is unique because it is made of sarsen stones that have been artificially shaped and then arranged in post and lintel formation, which basically means you have 2 upright posts that hold up a third member, the lintel, laid horizontally across their top surfaces. So think about something like a colonnade evolved from this feature. Stonehenge is also unique because the smaller stones, the blue stones, like he said, are from over 100 miles away in South Wales. By definition, a henge is a prehistoric circular or oval earthen enclosure dating from around 3000 to 2000 BC during the Neolithic and early Bronze Age. According to the British Museum, the Stonehenge builders were likely farmers who would need to know the changing of the seasons, which is why Stonehenge was built to align with the sun. On the summer solstice, the sun rises behind the heelstone in the northeast part of the horizon, and its first rays shine into the heart of Stonehenge. And then on the winter solstice, the sun sets to the southwest of the stone circle. So on one hand, it's a sort of calendar. However, historians also think it had religious and ritual importance. And the reason for that is because they found the cremated remains of about 150 people from an early, quote, iteration of it that are buried there, perhaps because solstices are an important time to remember these ancestors, end quote. In another place, I saw that Stonehenge was an expression of power and wealth of the chieftains, aristocrats, and priests who built it. Either way, whoever it was built for, people have been gathering there for a long time to celebrate the summer solstice. This practice was actually banned from 1985 to 2000 because of a violent clash with police. Now, modern-day Druid societies have claimed Stonehenge as their own temple, even though the identification of Stonehenge as being related to the original Druids is suspect. That being said, it's not clear if the ancient people gathered for the solstice the way modern people do or not, but definitely Stonehenge marked the solstices because of how it was built. So again, I feel like the history of Stonehenge is murky to me. You know, I'm really unclear on who built it, why they built it, who used it. Sounds like there's all sorts of theories, and then some evidence points to this or that. But whatever the truth is, it's clear that people are very drawn to this site, which has over 1 million visitors a year. And Stonehenge was designated a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 1986. So however you slice it, it is very much a place that draws people. I'll say for me, I didn't feel the mystical, mythic vibe. I wasn't necessarily feeling drawn to it. I didn't feel like I needed to cross the rope and go commit crimes to get near it. But it was really just absolutely remarkable, I would say, particularly because I just couldn't wrap my head around how these people were able to do that and what technology was required to not only make this thing exist, but have it still be standing here after all this time. Hello, Michelle. Welcome to the pod.
Thank you.
How are you?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Good. I hope here on, I think this will be the 8th episode.
Okay.
That you've accepted your role as co-host. Finally.
It is so much fun to talk about history and civics and geography.
Yeah.
Now we've even talked about geography in the same space of how we memorialize places.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, I was in England for a conference in July and got a chance to go out to Stonehenge, and so I was like, yes, definitely,
no, that's amazing.
Definitely doing an episode
you're
about this.
You're going to invite me to the next conference.
Yeah, I got you. But I was like, Stonehenge, right? Totally makes sense that
it's ancient.
It's ancient. Right? They're memorializing stuff.
So many people are there all the time.
There's burials there.
Uh-huh. And then crop circles.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
Stonehenge is weird. Ultimately is all I got. I do think the big thing that helps teachers maybe explore is why do humans create monuments? If that was even a monument. Was it a monument? Super still unclear.
Right.
But then also, what does the mystery of Stonehenge teach us about gaps in historical knowledge? So if anything, it just opens up dialogue in the classroom.
Absolutely.
But I don't know. What are your thoughts?
No, that is it exactly. Listening to were you on a bus? And
I was on a bus
speaking into the microphone. And so, I mean, we've all been on those kind of bus trips where, whether it's a trolley within St. Augustine or you're on in some exotic location, you are getting what that person thinks that you want to hear. And because you've paid for this for this tour, and so you're going to get a wealth of things that you might not have expected.
Yes,
but are entertaining.
Yes,
but then, and I I have been in that situation where people with me are like, you know, with their elbows in my ribs, like, fix your face. Like, you just, just accept it. We can talk about it later. So, right. So the person, the historian in me says, wow, that's a lot. But what it does bring up is the difference in historical interpretation and the difference between studying history and having tourism. Right. Because when you have tourists come into a space, they have expectations.
Right.
And you don't want to let them down, and you don't want to tell them what you think is wrong. So there's a lot going on there. But I think for something like Stonehenge, which is just, it's authentically ancient.
So ancient.
It's incredible and crazy. And to know that we have no idea about a lot about what happened there because there just are no written records.
Right.
And so you are really seeing what archaeologists do, which is, I have this thing.
Found these bones and these tools.
Right. I'm going to create an interpretation.
Yeah.
And so that is what it is. And it has changed over time. So the conversation in the classroom is that malleableness of how we understand history when we don't have a lot of artifacts or written records to make sense out of it for us. And that is, you know, that's wild conversation in a classroom, and kids love it because they are all about the what ifs. You get kids started on what if, and like your whole class period is gone.
Yeah.
Because their imaginations are phenomenal, and they just go wild with it.
You almost could do like an exploration of all the types of artifacts that have been found at Stonehenge and let students just start thinking about what is this place based on these facts.
Yeah.
And show them how no one's coming up with the same interpretation of it.
But you are all looking at the same thing that you can all agree, this is real.
Right.
But what does it mean?
What does it mean? Yeah.
Yeah.
And you know, I'm going to be honest, when he was talking about the aliens, I was like, LOL. But then when we were staying in front of Stonehenge, I was like, but for real, how did they get this here? How did they do this? And how is it not moved?
Yeah. So the other thing that I really love thinking about Stonehenge is ancient technology. And it's not just Stonehenge, right? So if you're studying ancient history, it's the pyramids, it's the whatever ancient civilization, the amazing things they created, because humans are so imaginative and so innovative, and we don't think of it so much anymore because we rely on technology to do a lot of things for us.
Right.
But understanding that humans, and actually this is, I wasn't thinking this was maybe going to be so deep, but here's a really deep thing, right? So students really do have this sense that people in history were dumb because they don't have what we have, right? Like if they were smarter, we would have had computers earlier. You know, like because they don't understand how time progresses and how ideas build on each other, they learn that, right? That's part of growing up. They are quick to judge and quick to think, well, they just weren't very bright. But then you show them amazing things like Stonehenge and the pyramids, and they start to build that understanding of, oh no, humans are really kind of amazing.
Yeah. And they're even more amazing that they could do those things without all the stuff we have.
Yeah, without a machine.
Very, very true. See, yeah, when I was like working on this episode, I was like, is there anything to talk about? Like Stonehenge is so weird, but no, there is. Some other thoughts I had was also thinking about this idea of creating your own, I guess, modern monument or your own modern something. Because essentially this is kind of almost like a sundial they've created. And then I don't know with that, if it becomes like a science or geography conversation, or even if you think more specifically about Florida, what would we have in Florida that you could recreate that monument and it wouldn't wash away in a hurricane?
Oh,
you know what I mean? Like,
I do. Yeah.
So then, I don't know, I think then you maybe start to go more into the science world. But it's a very interesting idea to think about, how could we in this state with these storms actually build something that would stay like that?
Yeah, no, that is That is really, and if I had thought you were going that way, I would have done a little bit more research because it's in the back of my head. It's not right at the front. But for those of you out there that like to do the research, there are Native American monuments that were doing the same things. And so we had the mound builders that were the Mississippians. And the Mississippians weren't just on the Mississippi River. They were all throughout, because the trade networks between the pre-Columbian Native Americans were incredible. And so the mound builders were building large scale complexes that they did have understandings of the seasons and the movement of the earth and how the sun changed and the constellations changed, and that there were the longest days of the year and the shortest days of the year. And they did, and now I can't, that's the thing that's in the back of my head, the site where they did actually have something akin to at the summer solstice, this, this particular piece of this particular mound would, reflect that knowledge in some way.
So doing a little bit of Googling, the only thing I see that sounds similar to that, well, I'm sure there's more. This is like my 3-second Google search. Cedar Key, the Shell Mound, or there's a Shell Mound in Cedar Key that sounds similar to this idea that is still standing. And then summer solstice at Old Stone Fort, because they have some kind of Native American thing there too. But yeah, we definitely would have to do a touch more Googling.
A little bit more research.
A touch more research
is required, but it is there. It's there.
Yeah. But yeah, even with this quick little thing, there's lots of stuff coming up all over the country.
Is also just wild to think that before there were schools teaching children about astronomy, that in our societies all over the world, humans were figuring it out and understood that there were patterns that repeated yearly and that they could track those, and it meant something to them.
Yeah, and that's impressive, because I barely
no,
I barely understand about the things happening. Well, thank you for joining me down this weird little rabbit hole of Stonehenge.
It is a weird rabbit hole, but it is amazing and informative.
For sure. That wraps up this episode of Resting Places, Learning Spaces. If you enjoyed this episode, I'd love for you to share it with your fellow educators, travelers, or anyone interested in the intersection of history and place. You can follow me on Instagram at Professor Van Dyke to continue the conversation or recommend a topic. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and remember, every resting place has a story to tell.